Hello there, live from London, this is BBC News. Warning sirens heard across Kiev as Ukraine accuses Russia of breaking a temporary Easter ceasefire. The Pope is expected to attend Easter Mass at the Vatican but won't give the main sermon as he recovers from pneumonia. The US says good progress was made in the latest round of indirect talks with Iran over its nuclear program.
And touchdown.
And NASA's oldest serving astronaut returns to Earth on the day of his 70th birthday. Hello there, I'm Rich Preston. Welcome to BBC News. Ukraine's president says Russian troops are still making some attempts to advance despite Vladimir Putin announcing an Easter ceasefire. President Zelensky says Russia is only trying to create the impression of a ceasefire, with Ukrainian forces reporting shelling and a number of assaults along the front line on Easter morning. It was an unexpected announcement of a 30-hour ceasefire by the Russian president, and in a message issued a few hours after it was due to begin, the Ukrainian leader said Russia's assault was ongoing in several places, but that his country would honour the ceasefire if Russia did. Well, this was the sound shortly after Russia's announcement. Air raid sirens across Ukraine's capital. President Zelensky says if a ceasefire does hold, it should extend beyond Easter. That's a sentiment that's been echoed by the British Foreign Office, with a statement saying now is the moment for Putin to truly show he's serious about peace by ending his horrible invasion and committing to a full ceasefire, as the Ukrainian government has called for not just a one-day pause for Easter. Our correspondent in Moscow, Steve Rosenberg, sent this report.
President Putin had summoned one of his most senior military officials for a battleground briefing. Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, told him that Russian forces were advancing. The situation is going well for Russia, the Kremlin leader concluded, but then a surprise announcement of a unilateral Russian ceasefire, albeit a short one.
Out of humanitarian considerations, starting tonight from 6 p.m. to midnight on Sunday night, Russia is declaring an Easter truce. I order a stop to all military activities during this period. We assume the Ukrainian side will follow our example.
The ceasefire announcement came a day after President Trump indicated he was growing impatient and might stop trying to broker a peace deal.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass.
Could a 30-hour ceasefire be a first step towards ending what has begun to feel like an endless war? The Kremlin's critics are sceptical. There is no trust in words coming from Moscow, was President Zelensky's reaction. President Putin's Easter truce falls far short of what America had originally been pushing for, a 30-day comprehensive ceasefire, which Ukraine had agreed to. Nevertheless, the Kremlin will use it to try to convince the White House that it is serious about peace, that it does want to end the war, more than 3 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Earlier, Russia and Ukraine carried out a swap involving more than 500 prisoners of war. Exchanges like this have continued throughout the war. On this, Moscow and Kiev have been able to reach agreement. What political leaders have so far failed to agree on is a path to peace. After declaring an Easter ceasefire, Vladimir Putin attended an Easter service in Moscow's main cathedral. Russia's president wants the world to believe that he, the leader who ordered troops into Ukraine, is serious now about ending hostilities. The world is watching to see whether a brief truce will bring peace closer. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, I spoke to Stephen Fish, a professor of political science at the University of California, Berkeley. So, is this the real deal, or is just for show?
Yes, it's all for show. Perhaps Putin wants to hand Trump another card in Trump's effort to support Putin, as he does completely. So Trump can say, well, see, Putin wanted a ceasefire and the Ukrainians didn't. He's looking perhaps to just strengthen Trump's hand. But we have to remember that Trump has been foursquare behind Putin all along. He seeks to undermine Ukraine's position. He claims that Ukraine was responsible for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Trump has never been serious about a kind of even-handed peace or about supporting the Ukrainians. He's been completely on Putin's side all along and even echoes his talking points. I don't think this is a serious effort on Putin's behalf to try to end the war.
So you say this is about playing into President Trump's hands, but President Trump and his team have said they will walk away unless there's any movement. What would happen if that happens?
Well, they're going to walk away anyway. I think Putin just wants to give Trump a talking line where he can say, see, Putin wanted peace and the Ukrainians didn't. That will strengthen Trump's anti-Ukraine, pro-Putin hand. I don't think that, you know, the American government under Trump walking away from this supposed effort to broker peace is going to make that much of a difference. I think what's made a big difference is for the United States government, after President Biden left office and Trump came to power again, abandoning Ukraine, siding with Russia, and changing places completely in the international system. For 80 years, the United States was a country that supported its allies and stood up to its foes. It supported its democratic allies in Europe as well as East Asia and around the world. It led an international order that was very positive and very propitious for American interests. Now Trump has decided that the United States will not side with and support other democracies, but rather seek to be a junior partner in a coalition of autocracies led by Vladimir Putin. That's the big change in the big picture. Now, what really matters here, of course, is if the Europeans step up to try to fill in that void that's been created by Trump's abandonment of Ukraine and siding with Russia. And there are real opportunities here for Europeans to take on a new leadership role and rise to the occasion. Perhaps Prime Minister Starmer, Chancellor Merz. We see other European leaders coming to the fore. The head diplomat of the EU, Kaja Kallas, Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark. There's now room and a real demand for real leadership among Europeans. What remains to be seen is whether they will follow through and really provide it.
Well, that's a question that's really been playing out ever since President Trump took office and these threats to walk away from Ukraine started. You know, the question over whether Europe can fill the void left by the United States. But the fact is, the US hasn't yet properly walked away from Ukraine. It is still sending some support. It's big business for the US defense industry, if nothing else. I wonder if actually it will happen, whether the US will just continue to support Ukraine and whether President Trump will just play the lines out to the press corps, but in reality, nothing will change.
Well, if you look at American support for Ukraine under Trump, it has diminished radically. The United States doesn't provide anything like the military support that it did before. Now, you're right; that relationship was beneficial even for the United States arms manufacturers, because all the aid that the United States provided to Ukraine went to purchases by Ukraine of American-made arms for the most part. But Trump so strongly sides with Putin. He so accepts Putin's story on the war, and he apparently thinks that he's going to get favorable financial terms from Russia. Remember, that will benefit him personally, let's face it, and his cronies. Let's remember, Russia was the only country that the Trump administration didn't slap tariffs on. I mean, it's hard to be more ostentatious than that in showing your support for Putin. And going all the way back to 2016, when Trump was running for office and Putin supported him surreptitiously in his election campaign, Trump has been in Putin's pocket. You can even hear it in his public statements. He is literally repeating talking points that the Putin administration is giving him.
President Trump would, of course, say that he's been one of the strongest presidents standing against Russia. Meanwhile, Professor Fish, this minerals deal that might be on the horizon between the US and Ukraine, what do you make of that?
I don't make much of it. Trump is trying to extort minerals from Ukraine. He might get something like a deal. I don't think it's going to last very long or be very substantial. Ukraine is not even rich. It doesn't have proven reserves and the things that Trump wants. We remember back to the $500 billion ripoff that Trump wanted to engineer of basically taking away all of Ukraine's natural resources. The fact is the Ukrainians have stood up to the Russians and guarded Western security, done the dying, done the fighting to ensure Europe's and ultimately America's security all along. We all owe them a debt of gratitude and try to extort minerals from Ukraine now. In response, it's just a typical Trump tactic. It's all about extorting from other countries. It's all about thinking the whole world, except perhaps Russia, tries to rip us off and then trying to get the best deal he can for himself. But I don't really take this very seriously.
Professor Stephen Fish there from the University of Berkeley, California. Let's take a quick look at the picture in Ukraine. This is the scene inside St. Michael's Monastery, right in the centre of Kiev, just after 9 in the morning there. This is the monastery, the famous monastery in Kiev, the blue walls and the golden domes as people gather there for their Easter celebrations. Volodymyr Zelensky saying that as of 6 o'clock in the morning local time, there had been nearly 60 cases of Russian shelling, despite this claim of a ceasefire in honour of Easter by the Russian leader. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the Easter sermon, traditionally given by the Archbishop of Canterbury, will instead be delivered by the Archbishop of York. That's after Justin Welby resigned over the Church's handling of child sex abuse cases. It's the first time in recent history that the Church of England's most senior Archbishop hasn't spoken at Easter. A commission's still considering who should replace him. Tom Simons reports.
Justin Welby's sermon last Easter.
In each of our lives, there are moments which change us forever.
He was referring to the cancer diagnoses facing the King and the Princess of Wales, but he did not know that months later, his resignation over his response to a church abuse scandal would change his life and the Church of England forever. It currently has no Archbishop of Canterbury, the traditional spiritual leader of a worldwide congregation. His duties are being handled by Dr. Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, who will deliver the Easter sermon at York Minster. He too has faced calls for his resignation from other clergy concerned at his willingness to act in the past when faced with evidence of abuse. While last year he spoke of inequality and global conflict, this Easter he may feel the need to address the leadership crisis within the Church. It will be some months before Justin Welby's replacement is chosen. A commission has carried out a consultation exercise and has now invited potential candidates to a months-long process of prayerful discernment before a new archbishop is chosen, expected in the autumn.
We take the concept of discernment really seriously. We want to say, what is God saying? Who is God calling? And that's not a process that we want to rush, because we do want to consult and listen. And I think, particularly at the moment, we need to consult and listen and discern who the right kind of person is for this really important role in the life of our church and indeed in the life of our nation.
But it's an uncomfortable moment for the Church of England, missing its figurehead during such an important time in the religious calendar. Tom Simons, BBC News.
Now, the traditional Easter Mass will take place in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City later. Pope Francis is expected to be there but won't give the main service as he continues to recover from pneumonia. A homily written by the Pope was read at the Easter Vigil in St. Peter's Basilica, in which he focused on the light of the resurrection breaking through the darkness of history. Before the celebration began, Pope Francis made a brief visit to pray and to see those arriving for the service, speaking and waving to some of the worshippers. This is the scene live this morning at the Vatican, where crowds are beginning to gather for the Easter Mass a little later this morning, and also, of course, hoping for a glimpse of the Pope. Let's go live there now and speak to our correspondent, Rupert Wingfield. Hey, Rupert, good morning. So the Pope in attendance, not giving the main service. Are we expecting to hear from him at all?
We don't know at the moment whether we're going to actually hear from the Pope at all. We do think he is going to attend, as you said. A chair has been put out for him on the platform behind me here. This is very unusual. Normally, the Pope would lead this Easter service here. He certainly did last year. It is probably the high point of the year for Catholic believers. Tens of thousands of people come here every year, more this year because it is a special year in the Catholic calendar. It is a Jubilee year, and so there will be even more pilgrims coming here to Rome for Holy Week. We've seen them in the last few days, but they will be here this morning for the Mass. And normally they would expect and hope that the Pope was going to lead that Mass. Of course, Pope Francis has been extremely ill, gravely ill in hospital with double pneumonia until about a month ago, and he is still in the process of recovery. We have seen him out and about in Rome the last few days, including a visit to a prison, and he appears to be in much better spirits than he was when he left hospital a month ago, and his recovery appears to be progressing, and so obviously many of the people coming here today will be hoping to see him and also hear from him, but we really don't know exactly what Pope Francis is going to what his role is going to be in the Mass this morning.
Okay, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes for us live there. Rupert, thank you. Well, the royal family will mark Easter Sunday with a service in Windsor today. The King and Queen will join other members of their family for the traditional Mass at St George's Chapel. It's understood the Prince and Princess of Wales won't be among those attending as they spend the weekend with their children at their home in Norfolk. Now, the United States and Iran have given positive reports of their latest talks on limiting Iran's nuclear program. A second round of talks, which have been mediated by Oman, have been held in Rome. A senior US official said very good progress had been made, while Iran's foreign minister said a better understanding had been reached. The two sides have agreed to hold further negotiations next weekend. Here's Joe Inwood.
As they arrived at the Omani embassy in Rome, both sides knew the stakes were high. US envoy Steve Witkoff and the Iranian foreign minister were seeking a diplomatic solution and to avoid a military one. This, their second meeting, seemingly made some progress.
This time, we managed to reach a better understanding about some principles and goals. Ultimately, it was agreed that the talks continue and we enter the next stage, and expert meetings start. Starting this Wednesday, technical meetings at expert level will start in Oman.
They'll be looking at a way to limit Iran's nuclear program. Now, Tehran has always insisted it is for peaceful purposes, but the US has never believed them. Now, if a deal is done, it will be replacing the agreement that President Trump torpedoed when he first took office in 2018. After years of painstaking negotiations, President Obama signed an agreement that limited Iran's uranium enrichment to just under 4%. In the years since that deal collapsed, it's thought Iran has enriched uranium to around 60%. The fear is that they could take it all the way to 90%, the level required for a nuclear weapon. Now, according to the UN's chief inspector, they are not far from that, hence the urgency of these talks. And if diplomacy fails, a military solution would likely follow. US stealth bombers have been moved into the region, and this evening, Israel's Prime Minister made clear his red lines.
I am committed to preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. I will not give up on this, and I will not retreat from it, not even by a millimetre.
Both the US and Iran have said they are keen to find a diplomatic solution. There was never going to be a deal today, but there has seemingly been significant progress. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Well, Arman Mahmoudian is Research Fellow of Middle East at Global and National Security Institute. I asked him if there was any hope of the US and Iran reaching a deal.
It seems they have had progresses in this round of the negotiation. Specifically speaking, the fact that they have agreed or stated that there is going to be a technical talks between the experts, I assume, nuclear sanctions and experts later on in the upcoming week is actually a good sign, because that was the same routine that they went through during President Obama administration. prior to signing or implementing the JCPOA. I believe that President Trump is going to revive another JCPOA, but the differences would be restrictions on Iranian enrichment uranium, specifically speaking, a stockpile that Iran can have of the low enriched uranium, the number of the first generation centrifuges, and are going to be a little bit higher. And I would anticipate that if they reach the deal, the period that restrict Iran or constrain Iran's nuclear project is going to be longer than what is being anticipated in the initial agreement in the JCPOA, if it's not going to be a permanent one.
Israel's Prime Minister has insisted his government has no choice but to continue its war in Gaza. In a video address, Benjamin Netanyahu said the conflict was at a critical stage and said fighting wouldn't end until Hamas was destroyed and all Israeli hostages released. It came as protesters demanding an immediate halt to the war clashed with police in Mazor in central Israel, where Mr. Netanyahu was due to visit. Elsewhere, the Israeli military says a soldier killed in Gaza on Saturday is the army's first fatality there since it ended the ceasefire with Hamas last month. But the Hamas-run health ministry says more than 1,600 Palestinians have been killed in the same period. Let's take a look at some of the day's other stories now. Thousands of people have taken part in rallies across the US in protest at a number of President Trump's policies. These are the pictures from Denver, where demonstrators carried banners supporting Ukraine and urging the government to stop arming Israel. Others chanted their backing for migrants who'd been deported and denounced threats to remove funding from universities. Police in Ecuador have made a number of arrests in connection with an attack at a cockfighting ring which left 12 people dead. 4 suspects were detained during raids in which weapons and uniforms were seized. Videos of the attack in the coastal province of Manabí showed armed men entering the ring as spectators dived for cover. And Canada's election agency says a record number of ballots were cast on the first day of advance voting in the general election. Nearly 2 million were cast on Friday. That's 36% higher than the same day in the last election 4 years ago. Their campaign's been dominated by tensions with the US and President Trump's threats to annex Canada. Voters have until Monday evening to cast early ballots before the main day of polling on the 28th of April. Now, NASA's oldest serving astronaut has returned to Earth on the day of his 70th birthday. Here you can see Don Pettit in the centre of the lineup, entering the Soyuz spacecraft from the International Space Station. The Americans spent the last 7 months in orbit and travelled back to Earth with 2 Russian cosmonauts, who were also safely sealed in the craft late on Saturday. Mr. Pettit and the crew landed safely in Kazakhstan on Sunday morning, a special birthday present to mark his 70th year. And he's had quite the career. NASA says he's completed 3 space flights, logged more than 370 days in space, and completed over 13 hours of spacewalks in that time. Now, time for some waggy tales, because there are many Easter traditions around the world, but one you might not have heard of. Yesterday, a group of dogs took to a racetrack just east of Edinburgh for the annual Corgi Derby. The event was first launched 3 years ago for the late Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee, but it's become an Easter weekend staple at Musselburgh Racecourse. Scott Duffield has the story.
Well, we're getting very excited. White flag raised. And they're off. 1 or 2 of the corgis weren't concentrating there, but look at number 8 go.
16 dogs, 70 metres. There can only be one winner.
It's 14! 14 has won it!
And this year, it was local legend Juno who took the top prize.
I'm sure she just wants more treats, but yeah, it feels good. She came 9th out of 12 last year, so a little bit of an improvement there. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be showering her with treats later.
In the hotly contested race, the 4-year-old Portobello resident pipped last year's champion Rodney to the finish line. And the secret to her training?
You just let her chase you all the time, up and down the beach. That's what we did.
The Musselburgh Racecourse Corgi Derby launched in 2022 to mark the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee by celebrating the monarch's favourite breed. It's since become an annual celebration. And waving the starting flag this year for the second time was tennis legend Judy Murray.
They're so noisy at the start because they're so excited, and you've got one owner with them at the start, you've got the other owner at the finish line with the treats or whatever it is, and some of them will run straight, some of them will not start at all, and some of them will go off at tangents and bump into each other or bite each other. It's absolute carnage, but it's great fun because it's so unusual.
So, will Juno be back to defend her title?
I think so, yeah. As long as we live up here, we'll be coming back again. We know she can do it now.
Scott Duffield, BBC News.
Director Lee was telling me in my ear that Juno must be feeling a bit rough this morning. An excellent pun from him for Easter there. That's it from me for now. Much more, of course, on the BBC News website and the BBC News app. I'll be back in a few moments' time with the latest stories from here in the UK and around the world. I'll see you in a bit. Bye-bye. Hello, this is BBC News, the latest headlines. Ukraine has accused Russia of continuing to fire artillery and launch drones despite a brief ceasefire declared by Vladimir Putin to mark Easter. President Zelensky suggested that for any ceasefire to be worthwhile, it should last for 30 days rather than the 30 hours announced by Moscow. The traditional Easter Mass will take place in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican later. Pope Francis is expected to attend but won't be giving the main service. The pontiff continues to recover from pneumonia after spending more than a month in hospital. And the US and Iran have given positive reports of their latest talks on limiting Iran's nuclear program. American officials say very good progress was made. Iranian media says the mainly technical negotiations were held in a constructive atmosphere.